635, when I got to Austin 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago, 635 East was going to be tolled from 75 to 30. That was the plan. It had been in the books to do that. Even though the studies kept saying it was not toll viable, that was the plan moving forward. But the plan they had at that time was a surface plan. That is, just like 635 now is, level with the surface. People in the area along 635 said, wait a minute, they put the 75 below grade, and that's really neat. We want 635 below grade. It won't be as noisy, it's much nicer looking, et cetera, so on. And so the project was put on hold. It could have been started, but because of the people complained about it, it was put on hold. The study was done. I think we spent about $50 million on a design. And when it was over with, the price tag went up $1.2 billion. Well over $1 billion to put it below grade. Senator Huffines, myself, Van Taylor looked at each other and said, no way could we ever agree to spending an extra $1 billion just to put that road below grade over there. Transportation dollars are too precious. That's doubling the price of it. So that didn't happen. And then the next thing that came up when we got to that point was, okay, we can start construction now on this thing, and fighting the issue of tolls, whether it was a toll or not toll, that was the battle that was going on of whether or not it was viable, should be tolled, or whatever it is. But the folks along 635 once again stood up and said, wait a minute, it's way too noisy out there. We were promised noise walls a long time ago, and with construction, it's going to get even noisier. And so we don't want this thing started, until you have the noise wall put up. So again, the project was put on hold while the noise walls were built. In that time frame, the Toll Road Mafia gods saw that there was a fight going on that they might lose. So the HOV lane was shut down for over a year. No one will admit to this, and there's no real evidence, but it is my firm belief that that was shut down in order to exasperate the situation on 635 and the people who use it, so that they would be so upset with how bad the traffic was with that lane being shut down that they would say, give us a toll road. And it worked. It worked because they had the help of a couple of Dallas councilmen, Adam Magoo and Lee Kleinman, who think toll roads are the greatest thing going for whatever reason. I cannot imagine, but they do. And so they got people riled up to go down and talk in Austin, to write letters. They've got an organization started, I think it was 635 now, that said, was begging for, give us a toll road, give us a toll road. All the time, there was no, the evidence was really clear that it was not viable. That is, you could, if you borrowed the money to build a road, you wouldn't collect enough to pay it off, like 130 down in Austin, and you'd go bankrupt. And so the fight continued. In the last election, our governor ran on no new toll roads as one of his major issues. I talked about it. Senator Huffines talked about it. In between, he wasn't running, I wasn't running, but said, it's time to put an end to this. We had Prop 1 money, Prop 7 money that was passed. We had a resolution, a plank in the Republican platform. I mean, we had everything saying the people were sick and tired of toll roads, we don't need any more. And so the fight went on, and between the RTC, the Regional Transportation Commission, which is underlying a lot of this, is this ridiculous complex set of organizations we have between TxDOT, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO, the RTC, the RMA, various organizations with various responsibilities that are not really held accountable to anyone directly for what they're doing. Their money they spend, there's no real meaningful audit, kind of like the audits of our school system, and that's another issue that I'll talk about separately here in a minute. But the RTC, in the meantime, had managed to get the authority to toll the HOV lane, what had been previously a free lane, which wasn't supposed to do. There are many of us believe that the toll that's on that lane now is illegitimate, should never have happened, that it was not what Texas law had said about turning free lanes, free roads into toll roads, but it did it. And so then it became grandfathered in a negotiated settlement between the governor's office, TxDOT, and the RTC, where many of us were saying the money is there to build this road without having tolls. There is no reason to borrow to go into debt. That's one of the reasons the opposition for toll roads. It's not just the double taxation. It's not just that it discriminates against the poor, because the executive can afford the few dollars. It's the point of where they've gotten of raising that fee so exorbitant and discriminating against the poor. Because in a toll road, a worker that has to take that road to and from work for the life of their working, it will have cost their family, at today's rate of $5 each direction, in excess of $135,000 out of their family earnings. That's taking away a home or a couple of college educations from the poorer families. And the people that argue for it say, well, that's a choice people make, to choose to take the toll lane. They choose to get on the highway and pay the toll. That's a choice. Okay, you might say that's a choice, but the choice that the worker makes is entirely different than the executive makes. The executive makes that choice and says, you know, if I jump up on that toll lane or toll road, I'll get home in time to have a couple of martinis before dinner. The worker's choice is, do I get home sooner without milk for the baby, or later with milk for the baby? So the choice that they're having to make is entirely different. It discriminates against the poor. As this thing went on from last November, when it was taken off of, because when it was coming up to be on the agenda, I wrote an article in opposition to continuing it as a toll road. Lieutenant Governor immediately put out a statement opposing it. The governor put out a statement opposing it. And it was taken off the agenda, and all of the toll roads that were planned to be put into the UTP, Uniform Transportation Plan, were removed. And so you'll recall there was a great deal of discussion about 635 had been canceled, it wasn't going to happen, et cetera, and so on. Well, that was all not false. It just wasn't going to happen as a, quote, toll road in the UTP. Well, over the course of discussions, the RTC was absolutely adamant that they had to keep the toll road. Remember, they had gotten the authority to do it. I went and testified against the NTTA and the Transportation Commission in opposition to it, but they gave it to them anyhow. Remember that authority started with TxDOT. TxDOT gave it to NTTA. NTTA wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole because they knew it wasn't viable. And so they gave it up and gave the authority to the RTC, and it strictly became a revenue source, an unaccountable, no accountable for a revenue stream going into the RTC. So the discussions were going on to whether it's going to be tolled or not. RTC put together a matrix of about 12 different options of tolling, not tolling, how many lanes, etc. And in this, they laid out all the funds that were available for the various options. Well, I got a copy of that, and I studied it. And what I found was they did have one option in there where the configuration of the road was to be 2, 5, and 2. 2 express or 2 toll lanes, 5 main lanes, and 2 service roads. That was the agreed to, that was the defined configuration of what the traffic demand needed. It'd be 9 to 10 lanes. Someplace that service road would be 3 lanes. And they had one because of the opposition to the toll roads and called them express lanes. 2 express lanes, 5 main lanes, and 2 service roads. Well, that version, the way they did the numbers, required the use of guaranteeing money coming from 3 projects: I-30 expansion, Highway 80, and 35, which were purposely done to make the representatives from those areas irritated and not supportive of it. But when I analyzed it, I found that it wasn't needed, because they did not treat that particular option with the same, I hate the word, fairness. They treated it differently on monies being available to be used for it and what they were doing. They took a configuration for I-30 interchange that was $200 million more expensive to do with that version than they did with any of the other versions. That was just one example. So when I went through and used the money in the same way they used it for the tolled versions on the non-tolled versions, we were within $68 million of the $1.8 billion. That's lost in the noise. That is way less than the accuracy of the estimate. Because remember, 1.8 billion is just a wild guess. That is just a wild guess based on the length of the road and history. You go into competition for this thing on a design build, and that number is going to drop like a rock. So, but anyway, so in the process, the governor agreed, came to the conclusion that if he allowed the one toll lane to continue, that he would be maintaining his campaign promise of no new toll roads. So that was what was agreed to. The RTC had a meeting, they passed the thing. The difference is, as we get through that filter of what they're now doing, they chopped one lane out of it. So the current road, based on what TxDOT is saying, is going to be one lane less than what the RTC is saying. Because I've talked to both of them. Both of them have a different description. So it's going to be interesting to see how it works out when we get down there. I intend to, you understand, the RTC, the Transportation Commission meetings, legislators don't speak down there. You know, we're supposed to just throw the stuff over the wall and let them handle it. Well, I don't do that. If I'm in a fight, I will go to every place there's a battle being waged. That's why I showed up over here to the 635 Now meeting and spoke, and I've spoken to RTC down there, and I have called meetings with TxDOT almost on a regular basis to discuss this thing, and I'll be back over there again. And possibly there will be a lot of citizens from this area that will go down and help testify that they don't really want a toll road over there also. But I will say that what we are moving towards is the one thing that I kept saying all along is we'll never finish if we don't start. So let's get the process started. And if there's a little bit of a disagreement, and we certainly have a bit of a disagreement in it, let's set that aside. Let's get that initial contract out there. What they're doing right now is the qualifications. So they're going to go through the qualifications. So it gives us some time to be able to work on trying to get that one lane back. Michael Morris has assured me that lane will be in there. TxDOT's assured me there's no way that lane will get in there. So we'll see what's going to happen out of it. It's a shame that we have that, but it's a function of the very convoluted, unnecessarily convoluted process we have. And the great opposition to this insanity of a managed lane was demonstrated last fall in November when the managed lane down in Austin, which is about 10 miles long, about the same as what we have out here, it went to $8 to get on that lane. Now, if you convert that to gasoline tax, that's equivalent to an increase of gasoline tax, $25 a gallon. That was dollars, not cents. That charge was equivalent to a $25 a gallon charge. That happened almost at exactly the same time when another managed lane on the East Coast, if any of you have been familiar with the Washington, D.C. area, there's a major artery called 66 going in from Virginia into Washington that has been turned into a managed lane. They manage the traffic in the morning and out in the afternoon. Anybody know what that went to in November? Second week in November. $40 one way. 3 weeks later, it went to $44. So it's an absurd. The idea is you raise the rate. It gives people who want to pay the money the option of being able to go faster. That's at the expense of making those on the lane, those are left to go slower. So I spent a whole lot more time on that than I intended to, but I just want you to understand where we are in this, and the fight's not over. I don't think it'll ever be over until it's actually done, because believe me, the Toll Road Mafia out there is strong, and they are scared to death that their gravy train of this toll roads is coming to an end.
Just a quick question on where does the law stand, or is it still there for once the toll roads paid itself off?
We're in a very gray area on that. That's one of the issues to be addressed this next time. It's one of the items that we'll definitely be looking at, and that's one of the outs that I hope we'll have, is that if we insist on, I'm not saying take toll roads out of the toolbox completely for building roads. I'm just saying don't make it the only tool in the box that you use. There are plenty of others. I mean, I'll give you one example of how this could be done. If we really say, okay, we're just not generating enough revenue right now to build the roads, and if we buy into the fact that it's cheaper to borrow the money and pay the interest than it is to wait to build it later, because the cost of construction is going up faster than inflation. If you buy that, I am not necessarily a subscriber to that, but if you do buy that, you say, okay, we have to. Well, let's do it in a way in which we don't penalize drivers and discriminate against the poor. Now, what we do know is that when we put in or improve like a 635, and we put in those frontage roads over there, just like happened up there with the George Bush, which they put in the frontage roads first, that the economy booms along those frontage roads. You put those frontage roads in, and Starbucks and McDonald's and the service stations and others start building along there. Property values go up, sales go up, and sales tax goes up. The purpose of transportation, the purpose of highways, has an economic basis. We do that. That is one of the core functions of government, is to provide highways and roads so that we can exercise our personal individual liberty to go about wherever we want to, and it's supportive of a growing economy. That's the reason for having roads. You put them in where the demand is, where people want to go, so you build them based on congestion, and where the economy will grow. Well, let's take the fruits of the investment and let the fruit of the investment pay for the investment. And what I'm talking about is you take the incremental increase in sales tax that comes as a result of putting in the frontage roads and use that to pay off the debt that would be incurred to build the road. And when the road is paid off, maybe you keep a portion of it for maintenance of that particular road, maybe not, maybe there's another way to do it. It's not necessary to make that decision. But the people of Texas in general benefit because you now have a growth in the economy that produces more sales tax, and it did so because you invested in the road to do it. And you haven't penalized the poor by having a toll, nor have you sold off the road like we did 635, which is now owned by a Spanish company for at least 52 years, and possibly for another 52 years after that, in which we get no benefit from what they collect. So there are other ways to do it. We'll go forward with that.